Imagine being the king of late-night television, loved by millions of Americans, making everyone laugh every single night for 30 years. Now imagine having guests come on your show who made you actually hate doing the job you love more than anything else in the world. That's exactly what happened to Johnny Carson. And today I'm going to tell you about the 8 guests who pushed America's favorite talk show host to his absolute breaking point. For 3 decades, Johnny Carson ruled late-night TV like no one before or since. He made it look effortless, sitting behind that desk with his perfect smile and that famous eyebrow raise, welcoming the biggest stars in the world. But what most people never knew is that behind that calm, professional exterior, there were moments when certain guests made him so frustrated and angry that he secretly wished he could just walk off the set and never come back. These weren't just awkward interviews or boring conversations. These were encounters that tested Johnny's legendary patience so badly that they made him question why he even bothered doing television at all. Some guests were too controlling and treated the show like their own personal billboard. Others were completely out of control and turned his carefully planned program into total chaos. A few were deliberately trying to shock and provoke him, while others were just so drunk or difficult that they created television that was painful to watch. But here's what makes these stories so fascinating. Johnny Carson was known as the most unshakable host in television history. If these guests could make him lose his cool, they had to be absolutely terrible. So let's dive into these incredible stories and discover what it really took to make America's favorite comedian hate his dream job, even if it was just for a few minutes at a time. The first guest who drove Johnny absolutely crazy might surprise you, because this person was supposed to be a comedy legend that everyone respected. Bob Hope had been a massive star for decades, entertaining soldiers overseas and hosting Christmas specials that the whole family would watch together. But by the 1980s, when Hope would appear on Carson's show, he had turned into something that Johnny found absolutely insulting to everything he believed television should be. You see, Hope had stopped being a real comedian and had basically turned himself into a walking advertisement. He would come on The Tonight Show not to have genuine conversations or be spontaneously funny, but purely to promote his golf tournaments and TV specials. He would bring a stack of cards with prepared answers written on them, and no matter what question Johnny asked, Hope would just look down at his cards and read whatever line was written there, whether it answered the question or not. This drove Johnny completely insane because Carson believed in the magic of real conversation. He loved it when an unexpected moment happened, when guests said something surprising, or when a genuine laugh came from nowhere. Hope had abandoned all of that in favor of turning every appearance into a commercial for his latest project. Johnny once told a reporter, he just has to show up with a golf club and a Reagan joke, and he's on. He doesn't have to be funny, and I resent that. That might not sound like harsh criticism, but coming from Carson, who was always incredibly polite and professional, it was basically him saying he couldn't stand working with Hope anymore. What's really shocking is that Carson eventually did something he almost never did with any guest. He quietly banned Bob Hope from The Tonight Show. NBC executives knew that Hope was no longer welcome, and if Hope's people called to book him, they were told the show was fully booked. When Johnny retired in 1992, Hope was noticeably missing from all the farewell shows featuring Carson's favorite guests. A comedy legend who had once been a regular on the show had been completely erased from its final chapter. The second guest who made Johnny's life miserable was a complete opposite problem from Bob Hope. While Hope was too controlled and mechanical, Don Rickles was a hurricane of chaos who would blow into the studio and completely take over Johnny's carefully planned show within seconds of sitting down. Don Rickles was known as Mr. Warmth, which was a joke because he was actually famous for insulting everyone around him. That was his comedy style. He would make fun of audience members, other celebrities, and even a host of shows he appeared on. When Rickles came on The Tonight Show, all normal rules went out the window, and Johnny was no longer the one running his own show. Rickles would grab Johnny's tie, steal his cigarettes, jump up from his chair to talk directly to the audience, and sometimes even take over Johnny's desk. He would literally push Johnny aside and make himself the center of attention. While this could be funny to watch, it made Johnny incredibly uncomfortable because he was used to being in control of everything that happened on his show. The crew members who worked on these episodes could see the tension in Johnny's jaw even when he was laughing along with Rickles' jokes. He appreciated that Rickles was genuinely funny and talented, but he hated losing control of his own program. Johnny solved this problem by refusing to have Rickles on alone. He would only book him when there were other guests on the panel. So Rickles would have multiple targets for his insults instead of just taking over the entire show. The third guest who pushed Johnny to his limit was Madonna, back in 1987, when she was at the height of her fame and controversy. Madonna came on the show with a very different attitude than most guests. Instead of politely answering Johnny's questions and playing by the traditional talk show rules, she challenged him at every turn, made sexual jokes that left him visibly uncomfortable, and basically treated him like an old-fashioned establishment figure that she was there to provoke. This was completely new territory for Johnny. He was used to being the one who could make flirtatious comments or suggestive jokes with female guests. But Madonna flipped this dynamic completely upside down. She was the one making him uncomfortable with her sexual remarks and provocative behavior. You could actually see Johnny physically leaning away from her during the interview, and his smile never reached his eyes. Madonna wasn't there to promote a project or have a normal conversation. She was there to create a moment that would get people talking, and she succeeded, but at Johnny's expense. After the interview, Johnny reportedly told a producer, "Let's not do that again." When Madonna's people tried to book her for future appearances, they were politely told that the schedule was full for foreseeable future. The fourth guest was one of the most painful interviews in Tonight Show history because viewers had to watch a brilliant writer destroy himself on live television. Truman Capote, who had written amazing books like Breakfast at Tiffany's, showed up to Johnny's show clearly drunk and barely able to speak coherently. From the moment Capote walked on stage, everyone could see something was terribly wrong. His speech was slurred, he could barely walk straight, and his answers to Johnny's questions made no sense at all. Carson tried everything he could think of to salvage the interview. He simplified his questions, tried to steer the conversation towards safe topics, and attempted to find anything that could create a watchable television moment. Nothing worked. As the interview went on, Capote became increasingly hostile and rude, making nasty comment about other writers and celebrities, and even insulting Johnny himself. At one point, he suggested that Carson wasn't smart enough to discuss serious literature. The audience started out laughing nervously, thinking maybe this was some kind of act, but as it became clear that Capote was genuinely impaired, the laughter died away and was replaced by uncomfortable silence. Johnny never discussed this interview in later years, but his actions spoke volumes. Truman Capote was never invited back to The Tonight Show. When producers would suggest booking him for future appearances, Johnny would simply shake his head and say, "I think we had quite enough of Mr. Capote." The fifth guest who drove Johnny crazy was an Academy Award-winning actress who had a very different problem. She literally never stopped talking. Shelley Winters would come on the show and launch into endless stories that went nowhere, constantly interrupting Johnny when he tried to guide the conversation, and completely ignoring every social cue that it was time to move on to something else. A typical Shelley Winters appearance would go like this. Johnny would ask her a simple question about her latest movie. Winters would start to answer, then immediately veer off into a completely unrelated story about one of her famous ex-husbands. When Johnny tried to bring the conversation back to the original topic, Winters would interrupt him and start telling yet another story that had nothing to do with anything. Johnny had a subtle physical tell when guests were driving him crazy. He would start drumming his fingers very lightly on his desk. With most guests, you might see this once or twice during an interview. With Shelley Winters, he was doing it almost constantly. You could see him calculating whether he should just get up and walk off the set until she finally ran out of things to say. Behind the scenes, Johnny's frustration was well known to everyone who worked on the show. After particularly exhausting segments with Winters, he would go back to his dressing room and ask his producers, "Why do we keep booking her?" The answer was that despite her terrible interview style, Winters was still an important Hollywood figure with real accomplishments. Banning her would have been seen as disrespectful. Instead, Johnny developed what his staff called the Shelley Protocol. They would book her for shorter segments later in the show when time constraints could provide a natural end to her rambling stories. Sometimes they would put her on a panel with other guests so she couldn't completely dominate the conversation, and Johnny was given permission to interrupt her more firmly than he would with other guests. The sixth guest who tested Johnny's patience was a comedian whose style was so weird and abstract that often left both the host and the audience completely confused. Dick Shawn was known for very strange, almost performance art-style comedy that pushed the boundaries of what most people considered funny. While this approach worked well in certain settings, The Tonight Show was not one of them. When Dick Shawn appeared on Carson's show, he would respond to normal questions with bizarre monologues, sudden character changes, or long periods of weird silence. Sometimes he would break into physical routines that used the entire stage, or even venture into the audience in ways that made Johnny's producers nervous. His comedy often seemed designed to make people uncomfortable rather than to entertain them. Johnny valued entertainment that connected with his audience. He understood sophisticated humor and could appreciate clever, unexpected comedy. But Shawn's material often seemed deliberately designed to alienate viewers and make them feel confused rather than entertained. This was a complete opposite of Carson's philosophy of television, which was to make people feel welcomed and entertained. During these segments, you could see the tension in Johnny's smile and the relief in his eyes when Shawn's appearances finally ended. After particularly strange segments, Carson would often make a quick joke to his sidekick Ed McMahon, subtly acknowledging to the audience that yes, what they had just witnessed was unusual even by Tonight Show standards. The seventh guest created one of the most genuinely frightening moments in Tonight Show history. Crispin Glover, who was famous for playing George McFly in Back to the Future, showed up in 1987, wearing platform shoes, a wig, and bizarre clothing, apparently playing some kind of character rather than appearing as himself. From the start, the interview was incredibly strange. Instead of having a normal conversation, Glover fidgeted nervously, spoke in a weird voice, and gave answers that made absolutely no sense. When Johnny tried to ask about his upcoming movies, Glover pulled out random magazine clippings and started reading passages aloud that had nothing to do with anything. But the really scary moment came when Glover suddenly announced, "I can kick," and stood up to demonstrate martial arts moves. He delivered a karate kick that came dangerously close to hitting Johnny in the head. Carson's reaction was immediate and uncharacteristic. He physically recoiled and his face showed genuine anger rather than just mild annoyance. "I think I have to go check on the chicken backstage," Carson said, starting to get up as if he was going to walk off the set. He ultimately stayed, but everyone could see he was on the verge of ending the segment immediately. The audience reaction matched Johnny's discomfort, with nervous laughter giving way to awkward silence as it became clear that Glover's behavior wasn't just eccentric, it might actually be hostile. During the commercial break, Johnny was visibly shaken and angry. He demanded to know how such a booking had been approved and made it clear that Glover was never to be invited back. Years later, people found out that Glover had been appearing in character for an upcoming movie role, but at the time, nobody had any idea what was happening. The eighth and final guest created such a disaster that Johnny did something he had never done before in his entire career. He refused to let the interview be shown again after it aired live. Oliver Reed was a British actor known for playing intense, often scary characters in movies, and his off-screen reputation was just as wild. He was famous for drinking heavily, getting into fights, and generally behaving outrageously wherever he went. When Reed appeared on The Tonight Show in the early 1970s, he showed up clearly drunk and belligerent. His speech was so slurred that he was barely understandable, and instead of answering Johnny's questions, he launched into rambling stories and occasionally made what seemed like threats toward the host. Johnny had dealt with drunk guests before. This was the 1970s, when having a few drinks before appearing on TV wasn't that unusual. But Reed's level of intoxication went far beyond just being a little loose and relaxed. He was hostile, confrontational, and seemed like he was actually looking for a fight with Carson. As the interview went on, Johnny's discomfort was obvious to everyone watching. His relaxed posture disappeared. His famous smile became tight and forced, and his eyes kept looking off camera, probably seeking help from his producers about whether to cut the interview short. The studio audience, who could usually be counted on to laugh supportively even during awkward moments, fell increasingly silent as Reed's behavior became more erratic and threatening. Johnny managed to get through the segment without any complete breakdown, which showed incredible professional skill under the worst possible circumstances. But immediately after the show ended, he made a decision that was unprecedented in Tonight Show history. The Reed interview would not be included when the show was rebroadcast to other time zones later that night, and it would never be shown again in any compilation or clip show. That one doesn't get a clip reel, Carson reportedly told his staff. In an era before YouTube and social media, this decision effectively erased the interview from public memory. Only the people who watched the live broadcast ever saw Reed's terrible behavior. This decision revealed something important about Johnny's philosophy as a host. Unlike some of the talk show hosts who might have replayed such a disastrous interview for its shock value or used the controversy to get publicity, Carson believed that genuine discomfort and hostility were not entertainment. He wasn't interested in showing people at their worst or creating gotcha moments that would embarrass his guests. Reed was never invited back to The Tonight Show during Carson's 30-year run. When producers would suggest booking him for future movies, Johnny would simply say, "I think we've seen quite enough of Mr. Reed." It was one of the very few times Carson explicitly blacklisted a guest, and it reflected not just personal dislike, but a fundamental belief about the kind of television he wanted to create. What makes all of these stories so fascinating is what they reveal about Johnny Carson himself. Here was a man who was known as the most professional, unshakable host in television history, someone who could handle any situation with grace and humor. Yet these 8 guests managed to push him to his absolute limit, making him genuinely angry, uncomfortable, and in some cases, actually fearful for his safety. Carson's reactions to these difficult guests show us his core values as an entertainer. He believed that television should bring people together, not drive them apart. He wanted his show to be a place where audiences could relax and be entertained, not a place where they would be made uncomfortable or confused. He valued authentic conversation over scripted promotion, but he also believed that there were basic rules of respect and professionalism that everyone needed to follow. Most importantly, these stories show us that even the most skilled and experienced professionals have their breaking point. Johnny Carson made hosting a talk show look effortless for 30 years, but dealing with truly difficult, drunk, hostile, or unpredictable guests was just as challenging for him as it would be for anyone else. The difference was that he handled these challenges with such skill and professionalism that most viewers never realized how close he came to losing his composure. In the end, these 8 guests represent the extreme exceptions in Carson's career. Out of thousands and thousands of interviews over 3 decades, only a handful of guests managed to make America's favorite host temporarily hate his dream job. That's actually a pretty good track record when you think about it, and it shows just how remarkable Johnny Carson really was at what he did. But it also reminds us that behind every smooth professional performance, there's a real human being dealing with real frustrations, challenges, and occasionally genuine anger. Johnny Carson might have been the king of late-night television, but he was still human, and these 8 guests prove that even kings have their limits. If you found these behind-the-scenes stories about Johnny Carson as fascinating as I did, I really need your help right now. Please smash that like button to show YouTube that you want more content about classic television history and the secrets behind your favorite shows. Hit the subscribe button and ring that notification bell so you never miss any of our deep dives into entertainment history. Share this video with anyone who loves classic TV or Johnny Carson, because these incredible stories about the most beloved host in television history deserve to be told. And if you thought these revelations about Carson were amazing, wait until you see what we're uncovering next week. We're going to expose the shocking truth about a famous TV variety show host whose squeaky clean family image on screen hit scandals so outrageous that network executives had to hire private investigators just to keep the stories from reaching the public. I'm talking about behavior so shocking it would have ended his career instantly if people had known the truth. You absolutely cannot miss this explosive revelation. So make sure you subscribe right now and get ready for another mind-blowing deep dive into television history.